United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation by KSCE Channel 38 Christian Television. And now, United with Christ.
Hi, and welcome to United with Christ. My name is Robbyn Holmes. I'm the youth pastor with Beth Bible Church, and I'm joined here today by two close friends of mine, Haley and Chevaria, and Edward Ovaya. Hi, guys. How are you guys doing?
Good. Doing all right.
Yeah, it's been a good week for you so far.
It's been a great week, actually.
Yeah. Are you guys getting ready for college?
Yes.
When do classes start?
They start next week.
Next week already. Mm-hmm. So pretty short summer for you guys. You guys have been pretty busy, right?
Somewhat.
Yeah. So, well, let's kind of recap real quick. Over the past couple weeks, we've been talking about millennials. We've been talking about how to reach them. What is a millennial? So we've defined them by this group of people born between 1980 and 1997, 99-ish, right? So you guys kind of fall within that age gap, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you guys, what we're talking about here means a lot to you from what we're discussing so far. Yeah, so we've been talking about being real, not relevant, desiring community over privacy, and giving millennials responsibility and a voice so that their opinions can be heard. What do you guys think about what we talked about last week?
So I think things that we talked about were, they were pretty spot on with what millennials want. Sometimes, especially since we grew up in a generation where advertising is all around us. Mm-hmm. We just don't want to see church as another advertisement, another opportunity for just people to bring some more numbers, but rather have an actual interaction with others and grow as a family.
Right. People aren't numbers. They're people. We got to treat them like people, right? What do you think, Haley, about what we talked about?
Yeah, I just think it's really important that we discuss these things and really just make people aware of the things that millennials are looking for.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about two really big aspects of what millennials are looking for today, and that's social impact and redeeming culture. And those are two really big statements. Now, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, we talked about missions, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about a mission statement for a church, and they always comprise themselves of three major aspects. One, God. Two, other people in a church community, and three, outreach, right? Either reaching the world, reaching a community around them. But I think what happens is a lot of times people give lip service to that last one. They always talk about reaching the community, but they're not actually doing it. What do you guys think about that?
So I would say, as you were saying, how the last one is just mostly lip service. So what millennials want is not just lip service. They just don't want to hear a sermon, but they want to see an actual sermon, if you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
They just don't want to hear people speaking, but especially with millennials would be more of the generation of practice what you preach, almost. So if we're seeing just people saying, "Oh, we're an inclusive people," yet we're not seeing any inclusivity going around.
Right.
It's just mostly people hanging out with each other. Then it kind of drives some of these millennials off and they just leave.
That's so true. I was just thinking the other day, one of the things that made me stick around our church was that our senior pastor and our youth pastor at the time, they would always talk about going out, making it real, be different. But they were also living that out. They were doing what they were saying, and there was no hypocrisy there, right? Mm-hmm. I think kind of going back to last week, we were talking about being real, not relevant, leading with vulnerability. Young people don't want more smoke, louder music. We're not looking for a DJ on the stage. We're not looking for the flashy lights and the
hip words,
and the laser and the hip words. We're looking for people to be real. Right. Finding a place where we can find community, and a part of this community is social impact, right? So what is social impact? We've heard a lot about it.
So in my words, social impact, I've never really defined a definition for it, but I would say social impact would be how can we, as the word says, how can we impact society around us? And sometimes, when people hear social impact, we think, what am I going to do for the whole world? But it doesn't even have to start with the whole world. It could just start with your family, with your church, with your friends, with your school. So sometimes we think that we need to go and like save the world. I mean, first of all, we're not the savior.
Right, we're not.
It's Christ. So what we can do is how can we show Christ, not just teach Christ, but show Christ all in every area in our lives.
I would say for millennials, when they hear people talk about one of our most important factors is reaching our community, but nobody in that community is reaching out, that's a big thing. And they say, well, nobody's doing it. I want to go somewhere where I can make a difference in the world around me. I think there are several things that millennials look for: social justice causes, right? Fighting poverty, fighting abuse and trafficking, helping people rebuild homes that have collapsed, or even rebuild lives, places where millennials can feel like they're making a difference, and they want to make a real difference, but they also want God to move through them. So today, for this point, I want to talk about three things. My first point is create a culture in your church where outreach is important, right? But to create a culture, you've got to know what your culture is, right? So how do we find culture?
I think some of the things that you look at when you're trying to figure out the culture of the environment you're in is paying attention to the things that are being said, like the things you repeat a lot, or the things you celebrate, and things like that.
Cool.
So, as a speech major, I've learned that culture is a sharing and exchanging of ideas by a group of people. So, you exchanging and sharing ideas will define what's going to happen in your household, in your classrooms, with your friends. For example, one household will be very different from another household. And if you don't understand each other's culture, people might think, hey, like, what are you doing in your house? So now in our churches, how does that look like? If there's no exchanging of ideas among people, if it's just one person saying what they want to do and not really listening to what others want to do, or one group of people only sharing their ideas but kind of ignoring everyone else's, that's not really creating a culture, but rather it's pushing people away. So one experience I could say would be, I went to this one group once, and I would say something, but people would look at me and just kind of ignore me. So did I ever go back? Not really. And so for many millennials, if you're not really being listened to, then they're not really going to stay.
That's a part of that, having a voice, right? So when we're looking at culture, I think you've got kind of a structure or format that people can use to analyze what's going on. Phrases that we say, things that we celebrate, or what we say that we celebrate, what we talk about a lot. Expectations, you know, when people come, what are they expected to do, or how do they get involved? And then also, what doesn't a group of people tolerate? What are they not going to accept in that culture? And a lot of times, we would be very surprised what culture is versus what we think it is. That reality and that expectation, and kind of bridging that gap. But once we know, we can say, hey, I want to be a culture that makes a difference in our community, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to be very intentional with that. So my second point is provide opportunities to impact either a community or the world. How important is it to have an opportunity to go and do one of those things?
I think it's very important because, like you were saying earlier, a lot of churches will say, you know, go to your neighborhood, go into your community, and like do these things, do things to make a difference and make an impact, but they don't really tell you how, and they don't provide opportunities like as a door for you to go and do these things, you know, like ministry opportunities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What do you think, Edward?
I agree with Haley in what she's saying. So I would say to make it easy, even kind of adding to what Haley's saying, what many of these churches focus is, you know, like go, like you said, to reach out to the poor, go reach out to like a social demographic, and for some even can be all like up to going, you know, to world missions. But even just starting with outreach, starting with opportunities is just go to your friend, go to that one person that you haven't met at church, that it might be the first time. Even just you outreaching to them is already a big thing going on there.
Yeah.
Because you never know, like that one person that's new. What if this is going to be the next Billy Graham or the next, huge world missionary, but us driving that person away by not talking with them, then we just lost a lot right there.
Right. And I got to say, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about with our young students in our youth ministry is James. He said, it's not just enough to believe, but when you put your faith into action, it makes a difference. It really does, right? Because we're not called to just hide ourselves in a building and just talk to each other. We're called to go out and be difference makers, right? Christ didn't say, hey, go take a class, go talk with another person for a couple minutes, then talk about how you're going to go do it, then go there and look at them, then come back and tell me what they look like. He just said go. But I think we make it difficult for people to get involved. And my last point for this one here is make it easy. Make it easy to serve. Make it easy to get involved. Make it easy to make any impact. And I've been a part of places where it's been a challenge, to get involved. What do you guys think?
A lot of people, I think it's important to make it easy to get involved, because a lot of people don't have a lot of time. They have busy schedules, lots of, they go to work and they have families and things like that. And so, like you were saying, having classes before you do outreach stuff is just not as efficient as it could be.
Making it way too complicated sometimes. People don't want to sit around in a classroom and hear about how to do it. They just want to go and do it,
Sure.
right? What do you think, Edward?
So, I would say that the way to make it easy, if you're already thinking about just your programs and, these events to do something as an outreach, then I think you're already thinking way too far. Instead of doing a program on how to talk to people, just go and talk to people. It can be as simple as that. And as Haley was saying, some people might be busy. We also have to work on people's schedules too. For example, at the college ministry, what we do is when we outreach to people in colleges, some people will say, well, I'm sorry, I can't hang out with you guys. The interaction doesn't stop there just because they cannot come to us. We normally just say, hey, let's meet up one of these days. If you see me around the campus, just give me a holler.
Yeah, making it easy, right? Well, let's come back to this conversation. We've got a music video for you guys. Stay tuned. Back to United with Christ. My name is Robbyn Holmes, and we've been having a conversation about millennials and how to get them involved in churches and communities, and really how to engage them in general, right? So today we've been talking about social impact, and I want to recap those points real quick. Create a culture in your church where outreach is important. A part of social impact is going out, serving, making a difference, right? And then providing opportunities to impact either a community or the world. It's not just enough to talk about it. We've got to provide pathways to make it happen. And then lastly, make it easy to get involved. If it's not easy, if we're making it complicated, then I think that we've done a poor job about helping people really move and make a difference. What do you guys think about what we've been talking about?
So I think that we've brought some good points regarding how to reach out to people in an easy way. And kind of going back to what he said, if you have to depend on plans and programs instead of just going out and do it, then I think there's a problem going on there.
Yeah.
Because it should really just be about just going and do it, not just wait for a pastor in a church or a leader telling you to plan and organize these things. Like, for example, if you want to go feed the poor, don't just wait for people to plan it at your church. Just go and do it. Invite some other people at your church.
Right?
That's right.
Don't wait around. Just do it. And I think that is the biggest hindrance for many churches. It's this idea that I've got to wait until it's approved or until somebody else puts it together. If you really want to make an impact, you know how to, and you'll make it happen, right?
And then most importantly, if it's the Lord calling you to do it, if God himself is telling you, hey, I'm going to go do this, then no one else can say what you can or cannot do if God is himself telling you.
There we go. And that makes a huge a huge difference in how you move. So one of the things, real quick, that I wanted to close out this portion of the conversation with is providing those opportunities, right? So what are young people passionate about to see justice found in?
So there's a lot of talk about equality nowadays, and I don't want to get too much too touchy on the subject, but there's a lot of talks about that, that we all need to be equal. But the problem is, I feel like people get too focused on these issues, like social justice, but there's not much adding Christ onto these issues. So how would it look different? There's a lot of divisions among people, but how can we get together, see where people are coming from, and then preach the gospel in those issues?
So it's all about how do we bring Christ into the impact that we're making. So fighting poverty, Christ is always at the center of that. Fighting human trafficking and abuse, Christ has to be at the center of that, because deep healing needs to come from that.
That's right.
Fighting these stigmas between people and generations and ethnicities, Christ has to be at the center of those conversations. Otherwise, there is no justice, true justice found, right? So let's kind of go on to our next topic here, redeeming culture. We say this, we talk about culture, and we always think about the big thing. We always think about the world standard of drinking, tattoos, smoking. Sometimes people's depiction of it is like a nightclub.
The way we dress, too.
How we dress, right? The whole hipster movement, dressing like a hipster. But redeeming culture, how does Christ come and shift a culture? So what do you guys think when I say redeeming culture?
So the first thing that pops into my mind is, especially when it comes to college ministries and even for youth ministries as well, is that there's a culture of people that you're not accepted until you dress like us, talk like us, like the same things as us. Other than that, you're an outsider.
So it's a definite statement.
And people don't really like to say it, but you notice it a lot, where if you're not like us, then we don't really want you until you start being like us. And unfortunately, that happens a lot in many college and youth ministries. So how can we get out of that mentality and become a culture where, you're different from me, you like different things from me, you talk different from I do, and it even gets even further. You're probably from a different culture, ethnicity, different color, but
different lifestyle even.
Different lifestyle.
Yeah.
But hey, how can we work together for the sake of the gospel?
Right. So I think for a long time we had this good-bad split, and there was a very straight line down the middle, right? Like certain things were good for Christians to be involved in, and certain things were super bad for Christians to be involved in, right? Like the idea, I always think about this, the idea of smoking, the idea of drinking, the idea of hanging out in a bar with friends. There's nothing wrong with those things as long as they stay within a certain context. But we've taken them to this extreme, right? Whenever Paul would go to a city, he would look at the culture of that city and say, okay, this is who they are. How can I use who they are and let Christ work on their life and let Christ make who they are better? And that's a lot of what we should be focusing on as well, right? Yeah. But we don't. So why don't we?
And well, adding on to that, and I think just that whole idea of the good and the bad aspects, that creates walls, between believers and non-believers, because it's it makes people feel like we're too good to be going to bars, we're too good for that, and that's sin and stuff like that, and it just builds these walls that people don't want to associate with us because of that.
So it's this big statement of, yes, it's different, but how can we use it for the benefit of Christ, right? So one of the things that I had heard, I think about a year back, was bar ministry. When I heard it, I thought, oh man, they're going to get shut down, because Christians in a bar doing ministry, it doesn't sound right. But some amazing stories are coming from just Christians meeting people in these settings where they feel comfortable, and they're sharing the gospel, and they're having spiritual conversations that they might never have anywhere else, right? And then I think of tattoos. You can get a tattoo that draws people towards Christ. It causes them to ask, hey, what is that? And it leads into a story or a conversation or even music and music styles, right? Like DJ music. A lot of these young kids, well, I say young kids, I'm only 26, right? A lot of these youth are listening to DJs and club music, but there's Christians versions of that, such as Capital Kings. They have a full techno album that's pretty decent, I think. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the way you're putting it, it sounds like if we're doing these things and glorifying God, then why is it bad?
Right. If we're able to reach people with the gospel in a unique way, a group of people that we wouldn't normally meet, why wouldn't we take that opportunity, right? What do you think, Edward?
So what I think is there has to be also a balance regarding that, where we shouldn't just act like the world.
Yeah.
Now, we're with the world, but not also become like the world. And now, for some people, they take it too far, as you said, where, oh, like, I'm not even going to dare, like, step a foot on these things. And, however, like you said, sometimes we feel like people should come to the church. But what about the church going to people?
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that, unfortunately, for some people,
Those are hard topics.
they are. And so I'll just give like a small, quick story here. Where I grew up, well, at least where my dad grew up, it was mostly cholos hanging out there and everything. But obviously these people weren't going to go to church, but it took one person to go there and take their Bible, just talk with them, and then they kind of wanted more of that. So it's just more hanging out there in that
Treating
group.
people like people, right? That's the whole thing here. And I think this idea of redeeming culture isn't looking at culture and saying everything that is that doesn't have Jesus stamp on it is bad, but it's saying, hey, how can we be creative with how we reach people in our culture? You know, for the longest time, wearing a suit on Sunday morning was a thing. I think on a Sunday morning for me, this is the best that I get. Jeans and a dress shirt. That's as close as I get to a suit. But it's different, and we have to treat it differently. So as we close up today, do you guys have any last thoughts that you guys can just briefly share?
I would just say that if there's someone that's coming to your church different from you, whether it's, you know, just appearance or even smell, for example, different race, don't exclude them, but rather pray to the Lord. How can they be of use in this church to glorify you? You know, that's something important that we should consider.
Yeah. What do you think, Haley, as we close?
No, yeah, I agree with Edward, and just that, just opening up to people and accepting them.
Really being those world changers that Christ wanted us to be in the world, right?
If we preach that Christ came to the world, then we should see the world as Christ saw the world too.
Wow, and that's so important. Well, thank you for joining us today on United with Christ. Stay tuned for the next program.